A post on Wuhan's Ghost Festival has gone viral on Chinese social media, and many internet users noticed one thing unusual about the mourning tradition this year. A Su-35 fighter jet crashed in China. Rumors claim that Taiwan shot it down. Taiwan denied it, and China gave no comment. In China, facial recognition technology is now part of people's daily lives. But recently, the Chinese are finding their personal data and photos being sold online at an incredibly low price. And protests continue in Inner Mongolia against Beijing's language policy. Even Mongolian people working for state-run media are beginning to fight back. Tanks are seen on the streets. Welcome to China in Focus. I'm Tiffany Meyer. Protests continue in Inner Mongolia against Beijing's policy to restrict Mongolian language instruction in schools. Even Mongolians working for the CCP mouthpiece are beginning to fight back.
More than 300 staff members of Inner Mongolia Radio and Television signed a petition against Beijing's policy to restrict Mongolian language in local schools. Inner Mongolia Radio and Television is a provincial-level CCP mouthpiece under the direct leadership of the propaganda department. And it's a rare move for staff working for CCP propaganda to raise their voices against CCP policies because it puts them at greater risk of losing their livelihood. The Education Department announced late last month that Chinese language instruction would be mandatory in primary and junior high schools in Inner Mongolia, beginning in the fall semester with Chinese language and politics courses. The protesting staff gathered in a conference room with the party media's surname is Party Plaque and signed the petition with their Mongolian names. The staff also pressed their fingerprints in a circle, resembling the shape of a sun, which is the symbol of Mongolian tradition. Mongolian teachers and students supported by their parents are going on strike in many places to defend their native language. As the protests spread, people recently see large numbers of armored personnel carriers on the streets. In Xing'anmeng and Ulaanbaatar, local police are hunting down Mongolian students and forcing them to return to school. As resistance grows, local authorities order an urgent notice that children of Mongolian public officials must return to school before the deadline they set, or else these officials will be punished or even lose their jobs. Police station of Tongliao City released 7 consecutive announcements about wanting 138 suspects, saying they will award $150 to anyone who reports verified leads. The police at the same time made public photos of the suspects as well as physical descriptions of some of those wanted. Police announcements warn that any gatherings in public venues will be persecuted. According to the magazine Bitter Winter, China's public security minister Zhao Ke-zhi was in Inner Mongolia days ago, demanding that the spirit of Chinese leader Xi Jinping be implemented. And Inner Mongolia University held an urgent meeting to ask all employees to follow the party line, including the policy is from Xi Jinping and must be implemented unconditionally. All people should say the protests were induced by foreign anti-China forces, and Mongolians welcome the policy. Nobody is allowed to say that the policy violates the constitution. News surfaced on Friday that a female official had fallen to her death in Inner Mongolia. Her last will reveals her determination to protect the Mongolian language. Local police asked her husband to withdraw posts on social media about her death. The cause of the accident is so far unclear. Reporting by Xu Wenhui, NTD News.
In Wuhan, it's customary to burn paper money during the Ghost Festival to mourn the dead. But this year, some city locals have noticed something unusual. NTD's Juliet Song has more.
Many in Wuhan mourned their loved ones on Tuesday who died of the CCP virus. That's when Chinese people celebrate the Ghost Festival. It's a local custom to burn papers to commemorate the dead. But more people than usual seem to be burning papers this year. One local posted on social media that during his past several years in Wuhan, he'd never seen so many people mourning the dead on the street. The post was shared around 30,000 times. Another Wuhan resident commented that at the time, the streets were so packed that she couldn't even find a place to burn papers. Still, other user wrote that it's unclear how many people in Wuhan died of the virus. The number is a mystery. Someone else added, many people didn't even make it into the official death toll. Chinese authorities capped the CCP virus death toll at around 5,000. But evidence suggests the Chinese regime has been severely underreporting the numbers. This March, funeral homes in Wuhan allowed families to pick up urns of those who died from the virus. Outside one funeral home, a truck driver unloaded over 5,000 urns in 2 days. That's according to Chinese media outlet Caixin. Elsewhere, another funeral home was distributing 500 urns a day. This puts the potential death toll in Wuhan at least 5,000 at the time. But back then, the official death toll was a little over 2,000. And that only accounts for these 2 funeral homes. Wuhan has 8 in total. NTD also obtained internal documents from Chinese health authorities. The documents show authorities in China's Shandong and Jilin provinces underreported their infection numbers. Take Shandong, for example. The area's local CDC has been consistently underreporting confirmed cases this February to varying degrees. On February 18th, 52 patients tested positive, but authorities reported only 1 new infection. And on February 21st, 59 new cases were confirmed. Authorities reported 2 of them. Juliet Song, NTD News.
Now we turn to suspicion over one of China's worst human rights violations, forced organ harvesting. Dozens of Falun Gong practitioners in China were recently forced to give blood samples to police. In early August, 4 Shanghai police officers visited the home of Shen Fang, a 70-year-old Falun Gong practitioner. She refused to open the door. Police officers then broke in, pinned her down, and grabbed her wrist, scratching her multiple times in order to draw blood. When Shen asked them why they drew her blood, they simply said it was required by the state. One police officer shouted at her, "The law doesn't apply to you guys. We're going to wipe you all out." In recent months, dozens of adherents of the spiritual practice Falun Gong have faced similar ordeals across the country. That's according to Minghui.org, a U.S.-based website that keeps track of the Chinese regime's persecution of Falun Gong. Just over the river from Shen's home in the Pudong district, police forcibly collected blood samples from more than 10 practitioners. Police also demanded their fingerprints, recordings of their voices, and samples of their handwriting. If they refused to cooperate, police threatened to arrest them. The blood testing in particular raises concern as it supports international allegations that the Chinese regime is profiting off of prisoners of conscience. It's done by forcibly removing their organs and selling them on the organ transplant market. In China, facial recognition technology has been integrated into even the most basic facets of everyday life. It's raised long-time concerns over government surveillance. But recent Chinese media reports show the data is easily leaked and often snatched by criminals.
In mainland China, facial recognition is a constant presence in people's daily lives. Taking the subway, checking into a hotel, paying bills, and even using public restrooms. But widespread circulation of the data has caused security problems. Recently, Chinese state media reported that online shopping platforms are now publicly selling people's private information along with their photos, all for a mere 50 cents per person. Chinese resident Mr. Li said he was in contact with someone selling that kind of information. He described the amount of data being traded are very concerning. He shared only his last name with us out of fear of retaliation from authorities.
There is a guy who sells that information. He can get anything. You just give him a name and he can tell you about his family members and everything. It's quite scary. A lot of such data has been used for criminal activities.
According to a Chinese media report, aside from a person's photo, the information pack also includes the person's ID number, bank account details, and cell phone number. Criminals can use that information to steal money from the target's bank accounts or even blackmail them. Another resident, Mr. Wang, complained about authorities' lack of action and refusal to stop the digital fraud.
When you say something online that's negative about the government, the police will show up immediately at your door and take you away. But now with so much online fraud, you hardly see the authorities arrest anyone.
Last year, a survey by a Beijing research institute showed some 74% of Chinese residents don't like to use facial recognition technology to verify their identity. Many cited concerns over their biometric data being hacked or otherwise leaked. The technology has also been used by the Chinese regime to suppress the Uyghur ethnic group in Xinjiang. Last October, the U.S. sanctioned several Chinese companies that develop facial recognition technology. That's after they provided surveillance services to the Chinese police, used to persecute Uyghurs. The Chinese regime have used the pandemic to ramp up its surveillance. Reuters reported that as Chinese universities reopens, many colleges have installed facial recognition systems on campus in the name of epidemic control. Students have found cameras inside their dorms and are made to submit information about their detailed movement on campus. Beijing has also been known to sell the technology to other repressive regimes. Penny Zhou, NTD News.
Now to a speech by Xi Jinping. On Thursday, Xi Jinping, the head of the Chinese Communist Party, or CCP, delivered a speech at a symposium emphasizing 5 things that Chinese people will never agree to. One of them is if anyone or any force attempts to separate the Chinese Communist Party from the Chinese people will never agree to it. Xi was speaking in the name of Chinese people. This triggered some strong reactions. One netizen wrote, "China is not the CCP. The CCP does not equate to the Chinese people. The regime of the Chinese Communist Party is illegal. Xi Jinping has no right to represent me. I totally agree with separating the CCP from the Chinese people, because the CCP is evil and Chinese people are kind." Another netizen wrote, "Do they dare to let 1.3 billion people vote publicly and see if the people are on Xi Jinping's side?" Recently, several U.S. high-ranking officials differentiated the Chinese Communist Party and China in their speeches and emphasized the threats are from the party. India's army chief said Friday he was very sure that the ongoing standoff with China over a disputed border region in the Western Himalayas could be resolved through talks.
We are very sure that through this medium of talks, whatever differences we have will be resolved, and we will ensure that the status quo is not changed and we are able to safeguard our interests.
The tension between India and China has simmered since June, when 20 Indian soldiers were killed in a border skirmish with Chinese troops. It's the most serious military clash between the two countries in more than half a century. The day before, India said the way to resolve the border dispute with China was through negotiations and peaceful dialogue. The Indian Army said in a statement earlier this week that Chinese troops carried out military movements over the weekend to change the status quo on their disputed border in a fresh flare-up between the two sides. India's Foreign Ministry spokesperson also said India will continue to welcome foreign direct investment in the country, but the companies will have to operate in accordance with the regulatory framework of the Indian government. Since the border conflict, the Indian government has increased pressure on Chinese technology companies. On Wednesday, India banned 118 mostly Chinese mobile apps, citing national security concerns. In a big blow to Tencent Holdings, India banned its popular video game PUBG. India's technology ministry said in a statement, these apps collect and share data in a surreptitious manner and compromise personal data and information of users that can have a severe threat to the security of the state, adding the apps threaten India's sovereignty and integrity. This comes after a ban on 59 apps earlier this year. Now we turn to Hong Kong. Beijing may have deployed armed police to Hong Kong in response to protests there. That's according to the United States Defense Department's 2020 China Military Power Report. The report released this week suggested that in 2019, the PRC, or People's Republic of China, deployed the People's Armed Police in Shenzhen and probably in Hong Kong. It explained that they were sent out to bolster the Chinese military's or People's Liberation Army's Hong Kong garrison elements, positioned to respond to protests. This is the first time a government source has suggested this is the case. Media reports have speculated since last year that mainland China's security forces were helping quell the protests in Hong Kong. Social media videos show law enforcement officers dressed in Hong Kong police uniforms and speaking Mandarin Chinese. But the dialect they are speaking in is one hardly spoken by local Hong Kongers, who tend to speak Cantonese instead. The report also suggested that the Chinese regime has been using its 50-cent army to spread Communist Party-approved narratives abroad on social media. The posts promote positive narratives surrounding the Chinese Communist Party, or CCP, and support Beijing's programs. Now to a fighter jet crash in China. A clip circulating on social media shows an airplane wreckage engulfed in flames on Friday. It was found to be near Guilin City in the southern province of Guangxi. Users who posted the video claimed that it was a Su-35 fighter jet belonging to China's Air Force. They said it was shot down by Taiwan over the Taiwan Strait or South China Sea. Guilin is located over 500 miles away from the Taiwan Strait. Taiwan's Ministry of National Defense denied shooting down the jet, calling it false information and completely untrue. In a statement, it wrote the Taiwanese Air Force Command pointed out that it strongly condemns such malicious acts by deliberating, creating, and disseminating false information on the internet in an attempt to confuse the audience. Another clip showed a man on a stretcher, as reports claim the fighter jet's pilot was injured. Neither Chinese authorities nor Chinese state media have commented on the situation. Now we turn to a Chinese-Australian writer and democracy activist who's been detained by the Chinese Communist authorities for nearly 20 months. In March, China told Australia that Yang Hengjun had confessed to the espionage allegations against him. But earlier this week, during his first meeting with his lawyer and Australian diplomats in a month, Yang denied making any confessions. Yang hasn't had contact with anyone outside Chinese authorities since December. Though the consular agreement between Australia and China assures monthly consular meetings. Yang says he's been interrogated more than 300 times by over 30 people. He explained that it can happen at any time of day, even in the middle of the night, and sometimes lasts for hours. The same questions are often repeated over and over for up to 5 hours a day. During his meeting, Yang requested a message be sent to his family. He said he will do his best, is innocent, and will fight to the end. He added that he will never confess to something he hasn't done, and called his detention political persecution. And here in the U.S., will this type of decoupling continue regardless of who becomes president? NTD's Paul Graney asked Emil Akin that question. She's been following the developments closely. She's the Washington correspondent for the Epoch Times.
Decoupling has become a very important topic in Washington, and I think it will gain more momentum after the election because both candidates, Trump and Biden, have promised to reduce reliance on China, especially for critical supplies. And we know that for decades, companies moved their production operations, their supply chains from United States to countries like China to be more competitive, to reduce costs, but those days are over. And these company boards now have to, because of the first US-China trade war and the COVID-19 pandemic now, have forced them to reduce their supply chains, to reshift, to relocate their supply chains, to make it more resilient. And they have to redesign their supply chains. And both candidates are pushing for this as well. And for example, President Trump in his second term said that he would incentivize companies, provide tax credits. He said that he would provide 100% expensing deductions for critical industries like robotics, like pharmaceuticals, to make companies produce in the United States. And he said that his plan will bring about 1 million manufacturing jobs to the United States. Biden pledged to bring 2 million manufacturing jobs to the United States. His strategy is different. He wants the federal government to be the big purchaser. So he wants federal government to buy 100% products made in America. He wants to bring more transparency to the content of US-made products. He said that he would invest $400 billion in his first term to make federal government buy from domestic suppliers. So he is trying to use government footprint, government power to promote domestic manufacturers, especially small ones. So that's his plan, and he wants to bring 2 million jobs. According to McKinsey study, his plan would bring 2 million manufacturing jobs to the United States. So I see that this momentum will continue, the decoupling conversation will continue even after the elections.
Interesting insights. I'm sure China won't be as happy to hear them. Amel, I appreciate your insights. Thanks so much as always.
Thank you.
Citibank is the latest American financial giant to make inroads in China. It's the first to get a domestic fund custody license. That means it will be able to hold securities and sell services to China-based mutual funds and private funds. It's new because China prefers to build up its own companies rather than giving the business to foreign players. We see this with making foreign companies partner up with the Chinese companies to get access to the Chinese market and then forcing them to transfer their intellectual property to the Chinese company. But under the Phase 1 trade deal, China has to loosen restrictions for American financial institutions. NTD's Paul Graney asked Curtis Ellis about it. He's the policy director at America First Policies. He's been writing on U.S.-China matters for decades.
American financial service industry providers have been trying to get into the Chinese market for decades. One of the concessions that the Chinese Communist Party made in the Phase 1 trade deal was to allow some of these financial service industry players to enter the China market without a Chinese partner, to operate in China without a Chinese partner. And this is a big deal for the Wall Street firms, for the financial services industry. I suspect that China is now letting this go forward as sort of you might say, a good faith gesture, or to show that they are a reliable partner and they do in fact live up to their agreements. And here, look, we're letting these American financial service companies such as Morgan Stanley and BlackRock and others come in and operate just like we said we would in Phase 1. Now, there is another dimension to this as well. Every company, every large American corporation that operates in China has been effectively co-opted, and the Chinese Communist Party has used them as leverage against Washington and used them as lobbyists in Washington to lobby for pro-China and pro-CCP engagement policies. Let me explain. There's a mountain of evidence that shows that we really should be wary of the CCP's growing influence in the United States, around the world. It's not become a reformist element. It's actually antithetical to many of our values and freedoms that we cherish and that we live by. They did not become more market-oriented. They still continue a range of abuses on the economic and trade front, not to mention the human rights abuses, which have only multiplied since we first brought them into the World Trade Organization and really gave them permanent normal trade status back in 2000. So, but the American companies that did enter the China market have effectively been turned into lobbyists to continue the open engagement policy, which has benefited Beijing more than it has benefited the American people. But any time that we have tried, or those of us who have been wary of China have tried to wake up Washington to these abuses, there's a pushback from the American corporations, whether it's media corporations that want to sell movies in China, or whether, as we've seen, a glaring example is what we saw with the National Basketball Association, the NBA. When somebody had the temerity to criticize China's crackdown on the Hong Kong pro-democracy demonstrators, the NBA immediately disavowed the coaches and the players who did that, and you saw some of the bigger players, LeBron James, spoke out saying, "Don't criticize China because we could lose some money if that happens." Well, this is writ large in Wall Street.
Curtis, I really appreciate your insights as always. Thanks so much.
Thank you.
And that's all for today's China in Focus. Thanks for watching and see you next time.